Hello, welcome back to Python tutorial from scratch. Today we will learn about pattern programming. Pattern programming is one of the most commonly asked questions during technical interviews of many IT companies. In this video we will learn to solve commonly asked patterns during interviews step by step. Normally companies allows to use programming language of your choice. We will use Python because writing programs using Python is very easy, and also we can solve these using 5 to 6 lines of codes. The first pattern we will solve is printing a square of stars. The first thing we need to do is check for number of rows and columns. Here there is 4 rows and 4 columns. So we will try to solve the problem. As we know, we can use print function to print something. We can use print function to print 4 stars inside the print function. But using this method is very inefficient since we need to write the code which should satisfy all the conditions. So in order to print the same thing repeatedly, we can use concepts called as loops. So we declare a iterating variable called as I and use the range function. The range function is used to specify the number of times a loop should be executed. Here we are using rang of 4, so it will be executed 4 times for I equal to 0, 1, 2 and 3. While using the loops we need to make sure that we keep the proper indent I on. That is, after colon the next statement should have tab space. So we have got part of the output, but it is in vertical form because the print function prints each iteration of the for loop and prints in different lines, so to print on the same line we use end function. Now we got one line of the output. We can use same code 4 times to get required output, but writing same lines of code again and again is inefficient, so we use another for loop. Here we use j as an iterating variable for inner for loop. Since we want to print these 4 times, we use range of 4. We will try to run the code. We are getting the output of 16 stars, but not in required form because the inner for loop prints the star in same line. So we use a print statement outside of inner for loop so that after each iteration the inner for loop prints the output in different lines. So we got the required output. So one of the ways to understand what exactly happens is by using tracing the program using Debugger. We have to run the program in debug mode. So we will apply something called as breakpoints, which are indicated using red dots, and trace the program line by line. So you can see in the debugger console the line by line execution. First what it does is it takes the value of I as 0 and moves into inner for loop. In inner for loop the value of j iterates from 0 to 3 to give us the first line of the output. After which the first iteration of inner loop stops. The print statement makes sure that the cursor will points to the next line. In the next iteration the value of I is 1 and again it enters the inner for loop. In inner for loop the j value iterates from 0 to 3 to print the second line of output. These continues until the number specified in the range function, after which the execution stops. So for loop executes the print statement for 16 times in total to get the output. So debugging is an excellent way to understand the logic used in program. So we have used only 5 lines of code to get the required output. The second type of pattern we see here is again the most commonly used asked pattern, that is to print the right-angled triangle using stars. Here we can see we have 4 rows and the rows keeps on increasing line by line. So a trick is used in these types of problems is use 2 loops, where outer loop gives number of rows and inner loop specifies number of columns. So we use an inner for loop with variable j. Now notice that we have used the range as I plus 1. We use this because we can see that as number of rows increases the number of stars increase by 1. And as we approached previous problem, we use print statement for the outer loop to print each iteration of inner loop in different lines. And there we go, we got the output for one of the most commonly asked questions in interview using just 5 lines of code. Here again we can use Debugger to check the line-by-line execution of the codes. In first iteration the I value will be 0 and it moves to the inner for loop. The inner for loop will have range of I plus 1, so 0 plus 1, so the inner for loop will be executed once and it moves to the next iteration. In next iteration the I value will have value as 1. South inner for loop will have range 1 plus 1, so the inner for loop is iterated twice, so we can see 2 stars on the second line. These steps are continued until we get the specified output. This is similar to the previous pattern, but instead of star there are numbers to be displayed. So we can use the same previous logic of taking I as number of rows and j as number of columns. So what we will do is use the same previous code with one simple change. Instead of printing stars in print statement we will print j plus 1. Let's debug the program to understand the logic used. What happens here is in the first iteration the value of I will be 0 and it moves to the inner for loop. In inner for loop the value of j will I plus 1, that is 0 plus 1, so it will be executed once. In the print statement we are printing the value as j plus 1, so the value will be printed as 1. In the second iteration the value of I will be 1 and value of j will be 1 plus 1, so the inner loop will be executed twice. So in first iteration of inner for loop it prints 0 plus 1 as 1, and in second iteration it prints 1 plus 1, so it prints twice. This process is continued until the satisfied conditions are met. There you have it, problem solved in 5 lines of code. This is similar to pattern 2 and pattern 3, but we have to print letters instead of stars and numbers. Here we use slightly different version of range function which has 2 values, lower limit and upper limit. The range function 1, 5 indicates for iteration from I equals 1 to I equals 4. The upper limit of 5 is not included. Since the ASCII value of capital A is 65, we start the range of j from 65 and end it with 65 plus I. The value of I will be changed based on outer for loop. We also use a function called schr to print the characters. So if we debug in the first iteration the value of I will be 1 and the value of j will be 65, 66. So the inner loop will be executed once for j equals 65, since the range function ignores the upper limit. And since the value of j is 65, chr of j gives ASCII value of 65, that is capital A. In this program we are printing the inverted right-angled triangle. As always we take number of rows as I and number of columns as j. Since the rows are getting reduced in size when the number of rows increases, we use the value of j in range as 4 minus I. Let us debug the program. In the first iteration the value of I will be 0 and the value of j will be 4i, that is 4 to 0, so it iterates 4 times from j equals 1 to j equals 3. Since the print statement has the value j plus 1, the value will be 1, 2, 3 and 4 for first iteration of for loop. In second iteration the value of I will be 1 and the value of j will be 4i, that is 4 to 1, so the inner for loop will be iterated thrice from j equals 0 to j equals 2. So the value will be j plus 1, that is 0 plus 1, 0 plus 2, 0 plus 3. These steps are continued until the conditions are satisfied. Tell us the pattern you are looking for next video and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.